Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my bamboo. So this is an update I do every year, around about September, October time, once the bamboos have finished their growth for the year. So as you can see, my bamboo collection has grown both in the size of individual plants and also the number of plants. I have quite a large collection now. So at the back I've got 3 Phyllostachys bamboos. That's this one here, then this one, and one in the ground. I've then got 2 different types of Fargesia bamboo. They're the ones down here. I've got a Borinda, which is this one here, and I've got a Chusquea gigantea, which is this bamboo over here. Now, because these are all kind of hard to see when they're mixed together, what I'll do now is I'll move some of them around and I'll start talking about my largest timber bamboos, which are the Phyllostachys bamboos in the background here. So at the back here, this is my bamboo corner, and this is where I grow my Phyllostachys bamboos. With the exception of this one on the left here, I normally grow that somewhere else as it's currently in a pot. But what I did a few years ago is I dug out 2 very large trenches, down to about 1 meter in depth, put in some rhizome barrier, and I planted a Phyllostachys edulis over here, and a Phyllostachys aureosulcata Spectabilis in this trench. So the idea is to keep them contained, because these are running bamboos. Now, although in my climate these are unlikely to run, if they do, they could cause an issue, so that's why I put in this barrier to make sure that they don't run. And with these bamboos, I won't be telling too much about all the different aspects of each bamboo, because I've done that in previous videos, but I'll talk more about how they've grown over the last year for me and how they've been grown for myself. If you want to see how the bamboos grow more in the wild, or what their interesting different characteristics are, I've made an individual video on nearly every single bamboo that I have, so you can find that on my channel. So I'll start with the newest Phyllostachys bamboo, and that's this one over here. You can see it doesn't look the healthiest. That's because I only got this a few months ago. This is Phyllostachys bissetii. So this is another of the timber bamboos, a running bamboo, but this type of Phyllostachys is supposed to be much more resistant to wind. So I've not seen that in evidence yet, but we haven't had the winter yet, so it'll be interesting to see how it does with the winter storms. This one has nice green canes. They're a darker green when they first come up, and then they go to this kind of light colour, and then as they get older they go to more of a yellowy kind of green, as you can see there. So this bissetii shouldn't grow quite as tall as my other 2 Phyllostachys bamboos, but it should still get to a decent size, and I'll be keeping this in a pot for now. But I have got a bit more of the trench with the barrier at the back there, which goes back a couple of meters, so I do have a space for it in the back if I want to plant it in the soil eventually. But I don't want it to run and compete with this one here, because I think this is a much nicer looking bamboo than the bissetii bamboo. That's a new one anyway, and I've taken a few young plants as well. So when I was repotting it, there's quite a few runners coming off it, so I've got a few potted up into some small plant pots, and I might put them somewhere else at some point, but for now I'm just keeping them all in pots until I find a final home for them. So here's a bamboo which is a much nicer looking Phyllostachys bamboo. This is the Phyllostachys aureosulcata Spectabilis, and this bamboo is also known as showy yellow groove bamboo. So this one, it grows a little bit bigger than the bissetii, I think, not much though, and it's not supposed to be quite as tough when it comes to wind damage and cold damage, but it is one of the hardiest bamboos I can grow, and this doesn't really get any damage at all from the wind and the cold weather. It's a very hardy bamboo, should be fine down to -20. So this one has done really well this year. Now in previous autumns what it's done is it's put out a lot of runners, and the runners have then just gone upwards and turned into whip shoots, and that's what some of these lower shoots are down here. What tends to happen is these grow in autumn, then the ends get killed off by the frost, which is why this one looks a bit truncated, and they're very floppy stems and they just stay down in the ground. There's one example over here. Again, you can see it's truncated from the frost, but there's one that was actually on the ground and it didn't get hit by the frost, and you can see it's just kind of run along the ground, a bit like a runner, but it's somewhere between a runner and an actual comb. For some reason it's been doing this last 2 autumns. This autumn is the first year it hasn't done it, which is a good sign, because what I want is the runners to stay in the ground and it to spread, or I want it to focus all its energy into its growth in the springtime and not have all these really floppy stems produced in the autumn and then not have the energy in the spring. So this one, you can see all the lower sections here are the whip shoots from last year, but what this has done this summer is put up lots of new strong canes. So you can see it's getting to a good height now. It's probably getting close to about 3 meters in height. The thickest canes actually came up in the last few weeks. They're right at the back. Now unfortunately a lot of them got their tops snapped off by the wind, so you can see they've kind of stopped at that height, but I have got 2 here which haven't had their top snapped off. These will probably get frozen at some point, they won't reach their full height. But these are definitely the thickest culms I've had so far. And you can see we've got that lovely kind of green stripe on the yellow cane there. So they're starting to look really nice, and what I'm hoping for next spring is a lot more of those thicker culms to come up. Because this plant won't have been putting all its energy into whip suits this autumn, hopefully it's going to have much thicker culms come up. So it's done well this year. I was hoping for fewer culms and thicker ones, but what's happened is it's just turned up loads of different canes, different sizes, but it's definitely upsizing and it's looking quite good. So looking forward to seeing how that one does next spring. To the side here, I got my Phyllostachys edulis. Now what usually happens with this one, again for some reason it sends out quite a lot of shoots in the autumn time. What tends to happen is it puts up its biggest shoots for the year up in autumn, and they grow to about the same height as the ones do next spring. So I knew last spring it would get to about this height, and it has. But this autumn, personally, it hasn't really sent up any bigger culms. It's sent up a few, so you can see there's this one here that I've pinned down to the side. It's just getting some new leaves now, but the new culms that are sent up this autumn haven't been any bigger than the ones that sent up in spring. So I don't know if that's because it's not going to upsize as much next year, or maybe it's getting more mature and it's not growing its big shoots at the end of the autumn, and it's going to focus more into the spring growth, which is what I'm hoping for. And this bamboo is quite different to the Spectabilis there, much stockier bamboo. It will get a lot taller in the long run because it is a really large timber bamboo, but for me it's always stayed a bit smaller, and in my climate it's probably never going to get to its full potential of 30 meters. But it's looking good. It doesn't have quite as many culms as the Spectabilis. It tends to grow less. The culms are a lot thicker for their height as well, so although this one is quite a bit smaller, the culms on this are actually slightly thicker than they are on the Spectabilis bamboo. And the stems are much more rigid. You can see it doesn't really flop down at all. It's a very good rigid bamboo, where the Spectabilis, if there's any rain or dew, this thing gets completely flattened by the weight of the water, whereas the edulis really holds itself well. So I'm hoping this might put on some thicker culms next year. We'll just have to wait and see. Another thing with this bamboo is it's supposed to be quite a rampant runner, but it hasn't done any running for me. I think because it's transitioning from juvenile to a mature bamboo form, and also because in my climate it's probably a bit cold for it. This isn't supposed to do well in the UK, although considering this was grown from seed just 3 or 4 years ago, I'm really happy with the rate of growth. So it has been very fast growing. It's actually just over 3 years old, so to get to this size from a small seedling, I'm quite happy with. And I'll show you pictures from last year, so this has done well. As I say, the height has got to about the same height as last autumn's culms, but instead of just having 1 or 2, there's probably about 10 different culms of that height, so it's really nice and thick. Last year it was thick down to about this height, but now it's thick with leaves up to around 2 meters in height. So hopefully next year we'll get some bigger culms, maybe some runners as well. I can show you down below, it has got plenty of canes coming up, so there's a lot of growth there. What I'm hoping for is this will continue to size up. It hasn't sized up this autumn like it would normally, but hopefully next spring we'll get some more sizing up. And it's got a good leaf mass. It had quite a good summer as well. I kept it well watered, so I'm really hoping it's put a lot of energy into its roots and we'll get a big upsize next spring. So that's the Phyllostachys bamboos anyway. These are all permanently planted. I'll now show you my other bamboos, which I hope to plant in the garden at some point, but for now they're still all in pots. So I'll start off with showing you my Fargesia bamboos. Ignore the mess in the corner, that's all my insulation ready for my bananas later in the month. But these are the Fargesia bamboos, which I've done several updates on. They're about 10 years old now. As you can see, they're much slower growing than the Phyllostachys bamboos. So these are grown from seed. Basically about 9 or 10 years ago, some plants went to seed in a client's garden of mine. I collected the seeds and I grew them, and all the seedlings were slightly different in their characteristics. So I'm not entirely sure what species these are. These are definitely Fargesia bamboos, so they're not running, they're clumping bamboos. And I remember the parent plant for these was about 3 meters in height, and the canes weren't particularly large. So there's definitely 2 main types I've got here. I did have originally about 5 or 6 small seedlings, but most of them eventually died over the years. I'm left with 2 now. So there's these 2 here. This smaller one is actually just a division off of that one there. I'll talk about the characteristics that are similar with the 2 types. The main characteristic is that they are very deciduous, so they're just starting to lose some leaves now. These will lose about 80% of their leaves over winter, and they don't lose it because of the wind damage or the cold damage. They just come to the autumn time and then they decide just to lose half their leaves. It's just a natural process they go through. Unlike most bamboos, which tend to be evergreen, these are very deciduous bamboos, and you can see both of them now, both types, are starting to show a lot of yellow leaves. and they'll rapidly start dropping their leaves in the next few weeks. But they do keep enough leaves that they do stay a nice green colour, and I often use these in the front garden, put in my barrel planters just for a bit of colour, so I have some greenery over the winter months. Even though they start dropping their leaves in mid-autumn, even if we get some really cold, harsh weather, they're pretty tough and they won't lose any more leaves throughout the winter. So I'll show you the smaller one first. This one, I've checked with a few bamboo experts, it's most likely Fargesia murielae, so it's a slightly smaller Fargesia. It's got loads and loads of tiny canes. You can see they're almost just like grass blades, they're really small. What's been happening with this one is it's been killing off its smallest ones and growing some slightly larger ones. You can see it is upsizing a little bit. There is some slightly thicker culms coming up at the back, but generally it's staying quite small. I think this is going to continue to be quite a small bamboo, never get particularly large. This one has a very pale colour to the leaves as well, it's quite a pale green, and this one might be good if I want to have like a dwarf bamboo somewhere. So it's not really the kind of bamboos I like the ones with the big canes, but this one is still a nice, interesting bamboo. Very hardy, quite small, and it'll probably stay quite small as this is 9-10 years old and it's not really upsizing a lot. So the other one, which I find a lot more interesting, is this one here. Again, it's probably murielae, but it might be a hybrid with murielae and nitida. So at the time of flowering, apparently there was 2 species flowering, and this one could have hybridized with nitida, which is why it's maybe a little bit larger. There's also got some interesting characteristics which make it look quite different, and they're characteristics that I quite like the look of. So I'll break off a branch from the other one to show you as a comparison. So this is the smaller one. You can see the sheaths on the leaves are green. On this one they're more of a dark purple colour, so you get that nice contrast with the leaves. Now with this one the culms are hard to see because they're normally covered in sheaths, but they tend to be just a pale green colour. This one here, there's a little bit of blue and yellow starting to appear in them. So I'll go back here to where some of the more mature culms are. I say more mature, they're actually just larger, they're actually younger. So you can see we've got a kind of a yellowy green effect here, but in certain places there's a bit of like a waxy bloom starting to appear on the culms. So it's not showing it as well now, but this was almost looking a bit blue in places. So that's a nice feature to see on this. So this one is definitely upsizing. You can see if I go lower down, there's lots of fine canes again, like on the other one, but these are all dying off and they're starting to disappear, and we've got a lot of these thicker culms starting to come up. You can see towards the back there. So this is definitely upsizing. It's actually probably got less culms than it did last year, but each one is much thicker, a lot more leaves. Also they're branching out quite a lot higher up, so if I pull this back you can see here the culms lower down, they don't have any leaves on them, and till about 2 foot in height, and then they have their leaves. So this one's definitely maturing, and I remember the parent on this was about 3 meters in height, so hopefully as this continues to mature it might get up to about a 3 or 4 meter high bamboo. Especially if it has some nitida genetics mixed in with it, it could get to a decent height. So I don't know what the eventual height of this one will be, but it'll be interesting to see how it grows, and hopefully we'll get more of that kind of blue glaucous appearance starting to appear on the culms as it matures. So now I'll go on to my Borinda bamboo, which definitely has blue culms when it's a mature plant. So this here is my Borinda papyrifera, which is a new addition for me this spring. So this bamboo, I don't think I've done an independent video on it, so I'll just quickly go over some of the interesting facts about it. So this bamboo is quite a rare bamboo. Basically there's a lot of different bamboos in China, in the Himalayas, where they're getting collected quite regularly, but nobody's really entirely sure about what species they are and what variety they are. So most of them are being called Borinda papyrifera. Sometimes they were called Fargesia papyrifera because Borindas and Fargesias aren't too different in how they look. But they're mostly collected by the same plant collector, and at the moment, because the species haven't been fully defined, they're actually just named after their collection number. So this one, for example, is Borinda KR6438. This is one of the hardiest Borindas. Now the interesting thing with the Borindas is most of them have a lovely blue looking cane as they get older. This one's still quite young, so its canes aren't blue yet. Another nice thing with them is they get quite large for a bamboo that is a clumping bamboo, so they can easily get to 6 or 8 meters in height, but you don't need to worry about bamboo rhizome barrier because these are clumping bamboos. They're not going to run like your Phyllostachys bamboos, so it's nice to actually have a hardy bamboo that gets to a decent size that doesn't need any bamboo rhizome barrier. Quite happy with this one so far. it started life a lot smaller, about the same height, but just a lot less culms, a lot thinner canes as well, and also the canes were much less in number. So these are doing well. Doesn't have any of the blue pattern starting to appear. Most of the canes when I first got it were more about this kind of size, but you can see I'm getting some much thicker ones, and I had one come up recently over here which is definitely the thickest so far. Just a nice green colour, but this will start getting some nice bluish colour starting to appear. So this one should be hardy to about -15. Most Borindas are a lot less hardy, but this particular variety, I think it was slightly higher up in the mountains, and it's proved to be a much hardier variety. So see how this one does. It'll be interesting to see how it grows over time. And now I'll show you my other rare unusual bamboo, and that's the Chusquea gigantea. So this is my Chusquea gigantea, and as you can see, if you've seen it from the last year, it has grown a huge amount. It's definitely upsized nicely. So I'll give you a little bit of history on this plant. I bought it, I think it was last spring, as a very small seedling. It grew quite a bit last summer, greened up nicely, but didn't have any particularly large culms. This spring it sent up all these taller ones at the back, which are much thicker and much taller, and then it sent up these ones just in the autumn, the last few weeks. So this one is a clumping bamboo, but it's the biggest hardy clumping bamboo you can get for my climate, so it should be able to take -15, but the culms can get particularly thick, and this can grow quite tall, probably about 8 meters, 10 meters maximum potentially. And it doesn't need any rhizome barrier. So most, as I say, most tall bamboos that are hardy do need a rhizome barrier, but this one shouldn't. It is an open clumper, so it doesn't have long runners, but its culms can suddenly jump about half a foot away from the previous culm. The other interesting thing with this is it has a solid culm, so there's no hollow bit inside the bamboo cane like you would normally expect. So this is the seed grown plant. All the plants around the world went to seed, I think it was about 5 years ago now. Then all the plants died off, and so all the new generations coming through as seedlings. So it was interesting, when I first bought this it was very cheap, I think it was about £8, but now people are selling them for £30–40 online. So I think there's a lot more interest now, a lot more demand for this plant. So what I'm planning to do with this one, as it's growing so well, is I'm going to cut it in half this winter, I think. I'll keep half here at my house, plant it in my garden. The other half I'll probably plant in my parents' garden, and I might try and take a third offset propagation as well, just so I can get a third plant and keep it in a pot, and I can just decide if I want to continue propagating it and plant it elsewhere in the garden or not, because this one will be potentially one of my nicest looking bamboos going forward. I think my Phyllostachys edulis will be my favourite, but because I have to contain that with a rhizome barrier, I'm limited to where I can plant that in the garden. But this one doesn't need a rhizome barrier, so I can plant this with a lot more opportunities. Basically, I don't have to worry as much about its root system. So I definitely want to get at least one of these planted in my garden, maybe 2 or 3 in the future. So I'll definitely be propagating this and trying to get a few more of these plants. So that's it for the bamboo update. The growth this year has been pretty good, especially for my Phyllostachys bamboos and for this Chusquea gigantea. I've also got my new bamboos. It'll be interesting to see how they do over the winter time. I know from previous years my other bamboos are fully hardy, but the Borinda is a little bit less hardy than those bamboos. So I'll see you again probably next autumn, unless we get some particularly giant culms appearing on some of my Phyllostachys bamboos. It will just be a yearly autumn update that I'll be doing. And if I do ever get any more bamboos, I'll do an individual video for new ones. Unfortunately, I don't really have much space now for new bamboos, unless I'm going to keep growing them in pots, because most of my garden's starting to get well planted up, and with bamboos getting so tall, they do shade out a lot of the garden, so they're limited to how many spaces I can plant them without shading out other plants. But that's all for this video update. I'll see you guys in about a year's time when I have another update, and we'll see how the plants have done over the next year.